My foot slipped on the floating debris. The misstep caused me to see what was coming up behind. Ankar appeared so close. A set of jaws ready to close over my stomach in order to keep someone from taking away Nick's power. I didn't even have enough time to swing my weapon to stop him. Why you Mordell? I'll come stop him. A familiar shape out of the corner of my eye caught both of our attention. I nearly cried out when I saw Mage flying with all his might, trying to help. How? Ankar reacted when he saw the dark shape. He tossed a fast ball of pure power at the dark creature. I screamed when my friend was hit, his thin body tumbling in the sky, wings bent and twisted from the blast. On his way down, he got an attack in. Just before the set of jaws closed in from behind, whatever Mage threw at us hit. The entire world froze. I could see my own body, but I was falling away from it, unable to do anything. I wasn't alone. Ankar fell as well, removed from his physical monster form. We clashed together, countless memories spilling out and mixing with each other as we both fought to right ourselves. For some reason, Mage hit us with a spell that exposed our pasts to each other. It was so sudden neither of us could handle it. I was the first one to manage to fight through. I pushed against the onslaught of noise and images, each memory passing by for just half a second, overloading my brain. I knew I wasn't in my body, but I felt as if I'd started wading through thick liquid until I finally broke free into an empty void of blackness. Time had no hold over that place. I recovered, shaken and mind jumbled. A feeling of eyes staring at me made me straighten up. Ankar had followed me into this space. His form no longer the same as the monster he transformed into, or the human-like one I'd met him as. A short distance away stood a dark silhouette. Its glowing red eyes were the only facial feature visible. The large claws at his side looked so sharp they seemed impossible. They looked as if they could cut by sight alone. I should have been scared to death, but instead a rage pushed me towards the threatening creature he'd become. What the hell are you doing? I yelled at him, the monster not reacting to my words. How dare you do this to Nicky? I thought you cared about him. I thought you cared about your agents. Why would you put everyone in danger like this? I'd never been so angry in my entire life. I stopped in front of the creature, who still refused to speak. I needed answers and he wouldn't give me any. Looking beyond him, I thought I saw a flicker of light. I'd been in this spell before. If I pushed hard enough, I would be able to see his memories. I may not be able to stop him even if I had answers through. Still, I needed to know why Ankar did all this. I walked past him, his head turning to watch. A clawed hand reached out to stop me, but I kept walking, his hand unable to grab me. His voice rang out, telling me to stop, to not look, to come back and let him finish what he started. My entire body felt like it was on fire as I moved forward, each step more painful than the last. He gave everything he had to hold me back. I refused to stop for Nick's sake. Stop it! You're only human. How are you getting this far? Boy, come back. You don't need to know. His voice got cut off. I'd hit a wall for a moment. Forcing my entire self against it, I felt it bow inwards, like a dam breaking. I spilled inwards into the past he desperately tried to hide. Falling through the years, I landed somewhere I never expected. Sitting and looking up, I was in the catacombs. I'd never gone this deep into them, but I knew by sight where I stood. Instead of seeing Ankar's memories through his eyes, I was inside them as a mere spectator. Voices echoed through the stone hallway as a pair of people came into sight. Ankar appeared with Abarash. He walked beside her in the same dark, monstrous silhouette form I'd seen, while in that empty space. I could tell this wasn't what he looked like at the time, but rather how he saw himself. A creature not even resembling human. Something with hands so sharp, no one could touch them. A constant thought kept repeating inside his head every waking second. Don't look at me. Don't look at me. He lived like that, seeing himself in such a horrible way, those words haunting everything he did. Abaresh looked about the same. Her hair a little bit longer, and she wore a little less jewelry. She was completely unaware of how Ankair mentally saw himself. She held a lantern in front of them and spoke harshly to Ankair. We need to finish sweeping this place. If anything was left behind, it could hurt her in the long run. I refuse to let there be anything dangerous to her just lying around. She scolded him. He must have been asking to turn back. He barely listened to her. A small hint of movement caught his attention, and he guided her lantern over so they could see inside a dark doorway. Within their line of sight stood someone partially hiding behind a doorframe, looking back at them. A small boy I immediately recognized as Nick stared at the newcomers. His fingers were dirty and covered in dried blood. He had no shoes, his clothing made up of tattered rags, and his hair long and unkempt. He didn't even look to be 10 years old yet. His small body looked nearly starved from being alone for so long. Is that a stone in human form? Damn. Then those bodies we found. No wonder she feels so guilty, Abaresh said in a low tone, but made no move toward the child watching them. Ankair acted differently. He took careful steps until he was right in front of Nick. Getting down on his knees, he wasn't certain what to do next. Surely the child would be too afraid to even go near him. He was about to ask Abaresh to come over and take care of it when Nick closed the distance. The fragile thing gladly jumped into Ankair's arms, and that shocked him. He stood up holding the child, expecting to break him. Through the tangled mess of hair, a set of dark eyes looked at him and saw him for who he truly was. The only person in his entire life that had actually looked at him. When he stood with Nick in his arms, he no longer pictured himself as the dark monster, but as himself. His hair was a little shorter, but just as he normally looked. It's pretty weak. You should kill it quickly, Abaresh said, her cold voice cutting through the darkness. Small hands gripped Ankair's clothing, afraid of those words. The hair on the back of Ankair's neck stood up on ends in a rage. This child could recover. There was no reason to harm the boy. He quickly turned towards Abaresh with a deep growl coming from his chest. We are not harming him. His voice, that of an animal. He's a stone. His powers are too dangerous to keep around. Even someone as dumb as yourself should know that. Someone can alter the entire world with him if they want it, she argued. I said we are not harming him. The only thing keeping Ankair from outright attacking her was that Nick was still in his arms. The boy shook from fear, and he wasn't certain if it was because of his tone. And what are you going to do? Take care of it. We both know you're not the fatherly type. Listen, I'm your partner. We may not get along all the time, but I'm trying my best to look out for you. With her hands on her hips, Abaresh waited for his answer. I never knew these two had been partners before. It was something one of them should have mentioned, and I didn't have any clue why it might be something they kept hidden. The beast of a man stood his ground. He stared her down with such a grim expression she finally gave up, sighing. Fine, keep him for a while until you fail and get all upset. No one is to know where we found him. I'll study him to see if he'll be useful. If she hadn't given in, Ankair would have gotten violent. They decided they would go back up to the surface. Abaresh would check the rest of the floors alone while Ankair got his life ready to take care of a second person. I followed behind them, watching them bicker. Nick safely in the taller man's arms as he brought the boy into the sunlight for the first time in his life. This entire event was from a past I never would have known about. Ankair was the one who brought Nick out from the darkness. He took him in, and yet they had no kind of relationship when I came into the picture. Nick didn't remember any of this. At one point, he'd been the most important thing to the older man. The rest of the memories were more scattered. It could be because they had faded naturally, or because they were too painful for Ankair to hold on to fully. He took Nick home, but didn't have any idea of how to take care of a child. His impulsive adoption freaked him out. First, he needed to get him registered and looked over. He took him into the corporation, filled out whatever paperwork was needed, and left the boy with some doctors to check on his health. He also asked what he needed to buy, clothing and toy-wise. This man really had no idea how to deal with children. When he stayed away from Nick, the darkness started to seep in around the edges of himself again. When they were finally reunited, Anker was shocked at how different the boy looked. He had been cleaned up, and they had cut his hair to his shoulders, saying the rest was far too damaged to keep. But Nick was healthy and could go home right away. It felt more than strange, having a child in his house. Anker's place wasn't overly large and had minimal furniture. The boy went from room to room the moment Anseer set him down. Nick's expressions and personality were the same as when he got older, but he spoke a lot less as a child. He had maybe spoken a word or two since they met, one of which had been to tell his guardian his name. Anker watched as Nick walked out of a room, then walked back to the doorway, squared up as if expecting something to happen. It looked like a game the man didn't understand. I knew what Nick was doing. This was the first time he was in a place where he knew where he stood at all times. He no longer got lost at every step. The doorway stayed the same no matter how many times he passed through it. This place was nothing like the catacombs he had spent his entire life inside of. As months passed, Anker kept working as an agent, as he didn't have his office job yet. For a while, he left Nick home alone until he got scolded by others and got random agents to look after him while he left for work. He also had issues connecting with his new adopted child. Nick didn't speak much, and often didn't even look at others inside the same room. He didn't play with the toys that Anker purchased, but instead read through all the books the man owned, regardless of how large of a volume it was. One of the clearest memories of the two of them was of Nick sitting on the ground with a huge picture book of a bird in his lap. Anker sat on the floor behind him, trying to brush out the knots in Nick's hair. The habit of brushing something Nick had never really picked, even after being taken in. So, Anker started to try and fix up his hair when it got too bad. "Do you want it up?" he asked the silent child. "I really wish they didn't cut it before. I need more material to work with." Anker had bought some hair ties, and on occasion would put Nick's hair up in a ponytail. Nick nodded and requested a braid that day. The man almost broke out in a cold sweat. He had never braided anything before. This was one of the only things the child ever asked for, and yet it might be something he couldn't do. He made an attempt, though, but his large hands turned out to be useless for the task. He wasn't able to hold the strands of hair to rope them into each other. Tugging on the hair, Nick's head jerked back a little, and Anker was convinced he hurt the child he'd taken in. Staring at the hands doing the world's worst braid, a flash came to his mind, an image of Anker's father's hands, and how he had inherited them. A set of hands that could do nothing but harm. When it was finished, Anker stared at the tangled mess, his chest aching. "I couldn't do it," he admitted, feeling the most useless he had ever felt in his life. Nick's small hand reached up to feel what his hair had gotten tangled into, his dark eyes looking up at his guardian. I could see a smile on his face, but Anker couldn't at that moment. "You can try again," Nick said, and went back to reading his book. Anker never did try a second time. His job filled his time. When he was home, he didn't know how to interact with Nick. The boy a mystery to him. He put Nick in children's programs thinking it may help him act more like a child if he interacted with others. Camping trips, music lessons, and swimming lessons. Turns out Nick was very bad at swimming and sank like a stone. He nearly died a few times, trying to get the basics, and Anker still hadn't forgiven himself for that. He soon asked for some advice from a coworker. They suggested that they do something together instead of sending him off to be with strangers. If Anker got to know the boy, then maybe he would see if Nick just a type of silent kind of kid, or if there could be something wrong. The issue being, Anker had no idea what they could do together. Nick appeared to have no interests aside from reading. One night, Anker went through all the books Nick had already finished, trying to find a trend. For the most part, Nick read everything. He didn't favor a type of book over another. When he picked up a large book about animals, he noticed something. Nick had placed bookmarks on pages with photos of different exotic animals and information about them. He hadn't bookmarked anything before, not even books he wasn't finished reading yet. This was something to go on, and Anker needed something. That darkness had started creeping back in. Unless he could get Nick to look up at him again, the monster he saw himself as would return. For the first time in his life, the man wanted a set of eyes on him instead of being disgusted when someone looked at him. Getting a day off and using his connections, Anker took Nick to a zoo after hours. They were the only ones inside with the animals aside from some workers. The moment they got inside, a small hand took a hold of Anker's finger to start dragging him around. The memory of the day, a more vivid one. He truly treasured the child who told him all about the animals they were looking at. He also loved the fact that Nick insisted on holding hands the entire day. The very hands Anker hated. The hated hands that were passed down from his father made a child feel comfortable. When the memory faded, I looked over to face the monster Anker had returned to with more questions. What happened between him and Nick? It wasn't just my partner that acted as if they never had a relationship before. He really didn't remember any of this. Why are you hurting him? I pressed. The dark creature stood still, red eyes glaring down at the person who had invaded his head and looked at the treasured memories he refused to share with anyone else. Just one more good memory, he asked. A day came when Anker came home in a rage. His hands were stained with blood and he had injuries all over his body. Nick had been put into a program that dealt with teaching small groups of supernatural children that lived near them. Anker wasn't aware of the time or didn't know that Nick arrived home before he did. What happened on that case became sealed away from it being too painful to ever relive. Anker had gone right to his spare room, sitting at the desk and looking at the hands had been cursed with. After cleaning them, they still showed signs of what he'd been forced to do. Somehow sensing Anker's mood, Nick slipped inside the room. Bonnie, come inside. They do. The man didn't notice him until a hand came over the side of the desk, holding a piece of paper. After slipping it across the polished wood, Nick fled without a word. Carefully, Anker picked up the paper, not knowing what it could possibly be. In class, the students were requested to draw their parents. In the corner of the sheet was a simple text printed "My Dad," and a space to draw what the kids thought they looked like. The drawing wasn't great, but definitely better than a child his age should be able to do. Anker had caught Nick practicing circles and alchemy with sidewalk chalk before. His tiny hands were steady, but not yet able to draw a person. The image was a very cartoonish and childlike drawing of Anker. His hair pictured 10 times the size it should be, and the wrong shade of red. His body was big, his face small, and what touched his heart the most was that no claws were on his hands. The moment he laid his eyes on the drawing, the mental image of himself shifted from the dark, red-eyed monster into that of the drawing. He couldn't see himself as the terrible version he assumed himself to be due to the gift, or at least he couldn't for a while. On the harder cases, he'd take a peek at the paper he carefully carried folded up in a reinforced wallet. Sometimes just seeing the corner of the paper was enough to bring back that mental image of a kinder-looking monster. The monster standing next to me wanted to keep watching the same memory over and over to avoid facing what had happened in the past. I reached out and tried to take his hand, but he pulled away from my touch. He finally allowed me to look at the night things went wrong, and the reason why he swore to never let his hands touch Nick again. Abarash had come over, telling him what he didn't want to hear. That at some point, someone would find out that Nick was a stone and exploit him. If in the wrong hands, Someone could change the entire world with the power he held. Something Anker himself would attempt in the future. Their conversation grew heated. He refused to give Nick up, or to let her hurt him. In the middle of the fight, he got horrified to see a small set of eyes peeking through a crack in the door. Knowing he'd been caught listening in, Nick made a run for it. Anker chased after him, wanting to tell him it wasn't as bad as it sounded, that he would never let anyone take him away or hurt him. His hand reached out to take Nick's tiny arm just to make him stop running so he could explain himself. He didn't even put that much strength into his grip when he pulled, yet a crack sounded from the boy's shoulder, his face flashing in pain. By accident, he had nearly ripped the entire arm off. Abarash came running as well. "I never said to torture him," she spat. Carefully, she looked over the arm. Nick never cried or complained. He let her lift him up and start taking him away to be treated. Anker just stood there with his mouth open, wanting to explain himself. Nick wouldn't look up at him. I could tell he didn't want Anker to see him about to cry. He was just child trying to be brave, but Anker saw it as if the only person he cared about in his life was unwilling to look at him because of fear. Everything came crashing down after that. Nick's arm healed, but the distance between them never recovered. Anker made himself scarce, rarely being in the same room as Nick for too long afterward. He only held on to fragments of memories of Nick slowly growing up. When he started to look like a teenager, he put a form in front of Anker for him to sign. He wanted to go to the dorms to live and train in order to become an agent. His weak nature and lack of magic skills would make that nearly impossible, so Anker wouldn't support his goals and push Nick towards something else. Anything else. But Nick kept pushing, so in the end he caved and signed the sheet, which caused them to grow apart even further. The drawing was still tucked away in Anker's wallet, but it no longer provided him with a pleasant mental image of himself. After Nick moved out, that single sheet of paper became a constant and heavy reminder of how he'd failed. "You shouldn't have to see the rest," the monster said in a deep voice. His memories faded, leaving us alone in a sea of darkness. There were still things being kept from me. I might not be able to change the outcome of the world just by knowing, but I needed to figure out what had caused Anker to snap the way he did. "Please, he's my partner. I have to know," I pleaded softly. We'd gone this far, and if everything would be rewritten after the spell ended, there wasn't any harm in showing me the rest. Backing up, he let the rest of the memories flood in. After a great deal of hardship, Nick became an agent, but no one wanted to partner with him because of his lack of magic. He trained to become a sharpshooter and was insanely skilled at hitting anything with any firearm. It almost made up for his lack of magical talents, like what the other agents held. He drifted from case to case and partner to partner. Then, she showed up in front of Anker, the person he hated almost as much as himself. Nah. He'd erased her face from his mind, and if he could, he would have removed every memory of her entirely. Back then, he'd been pulling extra hours in the office. Without anything else in his life, he'd poured all his time into work. Rarely being at home, everyone knew he would be the next to take the top supervisory role and take over the office, and not because of whatever family connections he had. Late one night, when no one else was around, someone stepped out to touch his arm. He jerked away, and then became utterly disgusted by who he saw. "You really don't need to look at me like garbage. I didn't think you hated humans that much," she joked. Her voice sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it for a moment. Her face was a blurred mess, making it impossible to see who it might be. Long blonde hair pulled back, and she played with it while walking in front of the much taller man. "I do not hate you because you are human. You are well aware of my reasons to dislike someone like you." He stepped around her only to have her get in his path again. "You don't need to be so old-fashioned, you know. Or maybe you're jealous I haven't offered you any," she teased. In a flash, he had her pinned against a wall by her upper arm, He could easily kill her, and he wanted to. His claws were itching to dig into her soft throat. The moment he saw her fooling around with other agents, he had almost tossed away his entire life to try and bring her down. "You disgusting, vile creature. Do not come into my sight again. How dare you sleep around and hurt her? My partner loves you more than anything, and it's ruined the most brilliant person I've ever known. You never should have met." He tightened his grip, expecting her to cry out in pain. She just smiled up at him as she got the reaction she wanted. At one point, Anne-Care had respected Abarash more than anyone else in the world. But after she fell for the person standing in front of him, she'd become blind to anything else. He couldn't do anything but stand back and watch as his partner was used, cheated on, and got caught in a gut-wrenching on-and-off relationship with someone who barely cared for her. If he could just kill her and let Abarash take revenge for it, he would have done so years ago to save her from this monster of a person. "How about we go talk a bit more privately? You can show me just how much you hate me over and over again. I like big angry guys like you. So far, no one has figured out a way to kill me, but maybe if you do it enough, it might stick." He backed up a second too late. Her free arm was wrapped around his neck, and her face was too close to his. He nearly came sick from it. "Miki, what are you doing?" Abarash had just showed up from down the hallway. Her voice held even, but her hands were digging into the file folder, betraying her real emotions. Before Miki had become partners with Nick, she dated Abarash. Another thing everyone either forgot to mention or had kept hidden. Anne-Care nearly gutted the girl from how much she hurt his partner. When she laughed it all off, saying she was just teasing, he snapped. He twisted her arm the wrong way. It broke as Abarash dropped her papers and flew down the hallway to her side. She was about to go after Anne-Care when Miki calmed her down. The arm had already healed. He didn't stay to listen to either of them or explain himself. If he had stayed, he would have gotten into a huge fight, unable to tone down his anger. Miki was human, and yet immortal. No one looked down on her because of her human status, as she was so skilled with magic if provided with the right tools. She could even make magic swords, which had almost become a lost art. Her personality wasn't ideal. Nothing really mattered to her, not the person who had become madly in love with her, not her job, and not her own life. Her only goal was to die. Her knowledge of magic? A simple side effect of trying to research how to end her immortal life. Anne-Care could rip her body to pieces only to have it come back together seconds later. He was unaware of it in the moment, but that interaction changed the course of his future. Back then, he didn't exactly hate humans. He just saw them as weak creatures needing to be protected. A job came to him at a time when Abarash wasn't available to help. It didn't matter. He could still do the case. Since he was one of the strongest agents, he could go on cases solo if he wanted. What he needed to deal with turned out to be a cult. He didn't know it at first, and had made a few mistakes on that case, which nearly cost him everything. He had risked his life trying to save some humans from being sacrificed. Most of those memories had also been locked away due to what happened. The humans he used all his power to save turned on him. The whole thing was a setup in order to use him to summon a monster and gain power. The cult failed in the end when his partner rushed in to save him, but the damage already done. He woke up in a private room in the clinic. A nervous doctor waited for him to be stable and awake so he could break the news. In fact, the man stood at the door when he said Anne-Care's legs were too far gone, and he wouldn't be able to walk from what the cult did. It had been a wise choice to be by the door. Anne-Care snapped, not accepting those words. The doctor fled to get help as the beast tore apart everything within hand's reach. Trying to stand, Anne-Care fell to the ground on his useless legs. He crawled over to a cabinet, tearing it open and looking for anything else to destroy, or something that could help to end his own life. Anne-Care's father was one of the main founders of the corporation. Saying he had family connections would be an understatement. His entire life, he'd been raised to become an agent. The best agent. If he couldn't be one, there would no longer be any reason for him to live. His sharp claws that had been passed down from his father were only meant for one thing. Abarash found him exhausted in a corner, with shattered bottles around him. He didn't want her to see him like this. He would have rather died than to be saved. "You're always throwing fits like a big baby. I thought you would have grown out of this by now, since we aren't teenagers anymore." She cleared a spot and sat down next to him. He pressed against the wall, not only ashamed of how weak he appeared, but because he could never control his emotions. They'd known each other for a very long time. Abarash had agreed to be his partner when they both got hired as agents. She never even hinted at trying to switch to partner with someone else. Not until Miki showed up. He knew if she could, she would partner up with her lover in a heartbeat. If he died, she would be open to submit the request. If it was anyone else, he would be fine to give up his partner. She laid her hand on his arm, the only sign of comfort she'd shown him in a very long time. "Hey, I know how to get your legs working again. Sorry I wasn't here when you woke up to save you from a freakout," she told him. She told him. He looked at her, not able to believe what she just said. If the corporation doctors couldn't do anything for him, then how could she? He knew how smart his partner was, but she really shouldn't be able to fix him. He started to question her on how it could be possible. She responded by giving him something that put him to sleep, reassuring him that he would be up and walking by the time he woke up. In his distressed state, he didn't notice the kind of smile she wore then. True to her word, he woke up and was able to get out of bed, his room a new one as he'd trashed the previous one. Getting dressed, he started off down the hallways trying to find her and ask what happened. Along the way, he passed by Nick. They hadn't spoken to each other in a long time. He ignored the years of self-hatred in order to go over to the boy to see how he was doing. Nick had grown up a lot since he'd moved to the dorms. He didn't look like an adult just yet. His face still held a bit of awkward teenhood, and his voice hadn't fully matured. His arms were full of bags he'd agreed to deliver over to the medical area. He was a person who always felt happy to help out, even though his face didn't show it. "Nicholas, how have you been?" Anker asked, suddenly unsure of how he should speak to the boy. Nick stopped to look at him. His expression drove stakes into Anker's chest. He looked at the other man like a stranger. "I'm sorry, but have we met?" Nick asked, clearly unable to identify the face of the man in front of him. For a long few seconds, Anker didn't understand. And then, it all clicked. The corporation couldn't repair his legs because no magic existed that could do so. Alchemy wasn't magic, and alchemy used sacrifices. Abarash knew that. She'd used Nick to heal Anker, but in exchange, Nick had lost all memories of the time they spent together. An outcome he would have given up his legs forever in order to avoid. "It's been a long time," Anker said, unable to keep the sadness from his voice. "I need to drop these off. A lot of things have to go to the medical rooms. I'll need to talk with you later." With a nod, Nick started to leave. He paused, his face looking as if he suddenly remembered something. "Are you Anker? I heard you were hurt recently. I'm glad to see you back on your feet," Nick replied over his shoulder. Nick flashed him a small smile, then headed back down the hallway, unaware of just how much that statement hurt. People passed by as Anker tried thinking about why Abarash would do such a thing. Surely she would have known he never would have wanted this. He needed to find her. He needed to talk with her. On a mission, he searched the entire building, finding her in the cafeteria of all places. He'd never seen her in that room before. She sat with a few other agents that all quickly got up to leave the table when he came stomping over. He did not like the look on her face. A smug smile showed him she knew something he didn't. "What did you do?" he demanded. "I just told him what happened. Nick offered to heal your legs. You could start over with him now. It would help keep your nose away from matters that are none of your concern. Rage filled his mind. Abarash had planned this. She set him up because Miki showed him some interest and demonstrate to him what she could do if he dared trying to meddle in her life. The partner who he'd trusted had taken away the only remains of a relationship he'd had with another person, while showing just how much she had grown to hate him. His reaction to finding this out was also part of her plan. He snapped at her, the rest of the agents fleeing from the room. His vision turned red as they fought, tearing up the cafeteria in the process. It took a lot of people to get him restrained. Abarash injured in the process, but not as badly as it could have been. They were removed as partners because of the fight. Neither explained what set him off. The entire event a stain on Ankar's family's reputation. He was given a great deal of work to make amends for the outburst, his father being the only thing that kept him from getting fired. Within the next few months, he had redeemed himself through his increased workload, to the point where the top office position got handed over to him. After he accepted the job, he was disowned. It felt like a bit of a relief to be away from such expectations, but also shameful that he had let down his limited family. He now had no family, no partner, and no friends. His new job was the only thing he had to live for. In order to be able to be Nick's boss, he'd been asked if there was anything between them that may cause him to favor the agent over others. He answered honestly and said that there wasn't. Abarash, now free of a partner, submitted to work with Miki. Despite everything, he didn't want her to accept the offer. He didn't want his now ex-partner to be further dragged down. That request now out of his hands. When he came into his office and saw Miki sitting on one of the couches, he nearly threw her out the window. If she wasn't here, then his partner would still be working with him. He blamed everything on her. And in the future, he blamed all of Nick's suffering on her actions as well. "Get out," he growled, forcing himself to not break her neck. "Ah, sweetie, don't be like that. I'm here for work-related reasons. The boss, before you let me have access to anything special they found in exchange for favors. I know you don't want that kind of thing from me, but if you let me look at anything top secret that gets brought in, maybe I can find..." He couldn't help but curse her out. His face became red, and his claws appeared as his rage took over again. "You selfish witch. Abarash wants you alive and happy. Nothing more than that. How dare you act like this? Just accept her partnership and stop letting anyone have your body as if it was nothing." Miki laughed in his face over how worked up he'd gotten. Abarash went out of her way to make him suffer in the worst way possible, and yet he still defended her. "I'm going to be partners with Nick. He's grown up to be such a nice kid since I left him behind, and you two were nice enough to find him. Might as well make up for some lost time." This time, he did lose it. Coming down on her, he tore open the sides of the couch she sat on. If he touched her, Abarash might find out and do something much worse than before. "Don't you dare ruin him like you did her. They both care about you. Hurry up and just use his power and die if you can't be a decent person." This went too far, and he knew it. Her face dropped, not scared of him but upset over the truth. Her only way of finally getting what she wanted was to force Nick to end her life. So far, nothing else had worked. "Don't you think that would be too cruel?" she said, dropping her false image for once. He pulled back, hating himself for saying such a thing. The statement now out in the open, the idea might gain steam if Miki thought on it for too long. She'd already tried making a different stone without any luck. She had destroyed the research on how Nick had been made years ago, before she knew it would be the only way out. Knowing their conversation was over, she got up and left the room. He had needed to buy new office furniture that day. For a while, things settled down. Abarash got a job in the office, with a title almost as important as his. Miki had either toned down her flirty nature or was wise enough to start hiding it. Her and Nick worked well together from what he'd seen. Due to how busy he'd become with work, he never noticed just how worn down and tired Mickey had started to appear until it became far too late. The worst day of his life arrived. One that replayed in his mind over and over again. The memories were fresh, not having faded in the slightest after 10 years. He received a call that Nick and Mickey were in trouble in an abandoned warehouse near a river. He shouldn't have been the one to go, but this was Nick. He needed to try and save him if it was as bad as it sounded. Running inside the warehouse, he frantically looked around for any signs of them. In the middle of the cement floor, a hidden circle activated when he stepped over it. No matter how hard he pushed, he couldn't break it. There shouldn't have been anyone in the corporation with the skills to hold him like this. He thrashed against the invisible wall, desperate to get out. When Mickey came into sight, he didn't clue in right away. She dragged along limp bodies. 10 humans with bags over their head lined up one after the other, her face covered in sweat from all the work. Ankar's voice didn't carry outside the circle. She'd trapped him, but for what purpose? Abarash came in next, also unable to stay back after hearing Mickey could be in danger. He shouted a useless warning for her to stay back. The circle not only keeping him in one spot, but keeping him from sight as well. She walked into the same trap he just had. After the circle sparked to life, he could no longer see his ex-partner but knew she still stood nearby. He slammed his fists against the magic until they turned bloody. Then Nick came racing in, his gun at the ready, and Ankar suddenly knew what all of this was about. "Mickey, are you all right? I heard something happened. People must have been confused that we were together," Nick said, worried but glad that she appeared fine. He couldn't see or sense the other 2 people that were right next to him. Nick could only see his partner and some humans that were lined up. One sat up, hearing his voice. A muffled cry of help came from the hostage. His hands and feet were tied behind his back, making getting away difficult. Nick quickly started to look for whatever creature had done such a thing, but a gunshot made him jump and look back. His face paled, seeing the bound man on the ground again, blood pooling from the hood. "Mickey?" he asked slowly, horror clear on his face. In her hand, she held a still smoking gun. She didn't look up at him, but had a cold expression on her face. When another person stirred, she shot, silencing them. Ankar didn't want to believe his eyes. He hated her, but he couldn't believe she would do something as cruel as this. "Mickey, they're human. What are you doing?" Nick demanded in shaking voice. He still hadn't raised his gun or moved. The sheer horror of what just happened had glued him to the spot. To Ankar, he looked so young. Just a scared child forced into a job that he never should have done. He wished he had made Nick abandon his hope of becoming an agent, or that he could have done anything to spare him from this.